So welcome back. We hope you had a good break. So session 1 was indeed very insightful with inspiring messages from President Masa and of course WFP Executive Director Cindy McCain and very distinguished panelists. Again, just reminders, please don't forget to complete the evaluation form flash on screen after each session. We will upload all session recordings and presentations in the forum website. So please visit the site from time to time. We are excited for the next session as we discuss the future of food. This session will discuss the results of a regional foresight study on the future scenarios of food systems in Asia and the Pacific by 2050. So how can we integrate these results in our regional and national level food security planning? To start the discussions, let me call on the moderator for session 2, DG Emmanuel Jimenez, our Director General for ADB's Independent Evaluation Department. Over to you, DG Jimenez. DG Manny.
Thanks very much. So good morning and mabuhay. Welcome everybody. I want to express my appreciation and congratulations to the Sectors Group for organizing this food security forum on as we heard this morning, a hugely important topic and timely. I was wondering actually why I was invited to moderate one of the sessions coming from the Independent Evaluation Group. Not always the most popular department in the MDBs, but we are actually doing an evaluation of ADB's food security and rural development operational priority, which I think everyone here will be interested in, at least officially. The way that this session will work is we have a couple of presentations, one very brief one from the IFAD president, Alvaro Lario, and then a very interesting presentation by Mark Rosegrant of IFPRI, who is looking at, going to be presenting the results of a foresight study, because this is going to be a session on the future of food and agriculture in Asia. And then we'll have a panel whom I'll introduce after that. So with that, if we can turn it over to the technical people to bring on the message from IFAD President Alvaro Lario. So can we have the presentation, please?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your kind invitation to speak today. I am sorry that I cannot do so in person, but I'm honored to be here because I know we all share the same convictions. First, that the small farms of Asia, 70% of the world's 570 million total, are vital to the future food supply of the region. And second, that we can and we must do much more to invest in them. We all know how tough the last few years have been for small-scale farmers. They have been hit hard by COVID-19, price instability, and the impact of climate change and biodiversity loss. Small-scale family farmers throughout all Asia have been hit particularly hard. With average farm sizes that are under 2 hectares across much of the Asia and the Pacific, these smallholder food producers are highly vulnerable to external forces, and they really need our investments. Because family farming is the backbone of rural economies and of food systems everywhere. In fact, 1/4 of us on the planet rely on small family farms for our livelihoods and our food security. Without family farms, many of us would not have eaten today. Not only are small farms efficient, they also have a lighter relative footprint on essential ecosystems. They do not depend heavily on fresh water for crops, and they preserve biodiversity instead of depleting it. But today, higher temperatures and more erratic and extreme weather threaten their livelihoods and the region's overall food security. To adapt, small family farms desperately need investments to overcome the growing risks that they are facing. Yet they just get 0.8% of climate finance to help them adapt to extreme changes in our climate. This needs to increase because it is an investment in our collective future. Let's be clear, small farms are businesses. They need access to finance and tools to use it. They need to be fairly and decently compensated for both the food and the raw materials that they produce, and for the environmental, biodiversity, and watershed management services that they provide. And this is where the close collaboration between IFAD and the Asian Development Bank comes in. I am proud that we have been partners since IFAD's inception in 1977. Working together alongside Farmers Association and local and national governments, we have made a tangible difference to both the lives of millions of farmers and to sustainability in the region. Across Asia and the Pacific, our 570 million current portfolio, spanning from Pakistan to Nepal and from China to Tonga, aims to raise incomes, while also enhancing sustainability and preserving biodiversity. Our joint project in hilly areas of Nepal helped 67,000 farming households to raise their income and to reduce their use of chemicals. Drawing on local knowledge and traditional techniques for pest management, it introduced agroecological practices such as mixed cropping, biomulching, and swales, an ancient innovation that helps gather water without irrigation systems. In the Philippines, we work with indigenous communities to develop sustainable agroforestry, coffee and fruit cultivation, reducing runoff and enhancing resilience against typhoon and drought. Or in Bangladesh, where we tap the Internet of Things to install remote water quality sensors that help fish farmers monitor water quality and oxygen levels when rainfall is scarce. The result is an ecological renaissance for the River Halda and an economic renaissance for the fishing communities. Ladies and gentlemen, IFAD prides itself as a partner in transforming food systems, including in this time of changing climate and biodiversity. Over the decades, IFAD has been a pioneer in every aspect of agriculture and climate risk management, from index insurance to blended finance. In all our projects, rural people are important partners, contributing their ideas and experience at every stage from project design to implementation. Often they also invest alongside us. We make always sure that these projects benefit the most vulnerable, including youth, women, and indigenous peoples. And we are good at what we do. In 2021, IFAD was ranked the most efficient and effective multilateral organization by the Center for Global Development. By leveraging our balance sheet and our partnerships, we convert every dollar contributed by a member state into $6 invested on the ground. In our upcoming investment cycle, 2025 to 2027, we are prioritizing nature-based solutions to restore and protect ecosystems, drawing upon the wisdom of scientists, farmers, and indigenous peoples. Over the next 3 years, we aim to enhance the lives and resilience of 100 million rural people. Across Asia and the Pacific, the Asian Development Bank will be a vital partner in achieving all of these goals. At this time of dramatic and deadly climate change, I look forward to deepening our work with the Asian Development Bank. Together, we can improve the lives and incomes of small-scale farmers and of the communities and societies in which they live. We can ensure that they have the tools they need to build resilient livelihoods, to feed their families and communities, and to continue to play their crucial role in preserving biodiversity and a food-secure future for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alvaro, for what I think was a pretty inspiring talk and call to action for all of us. We'll get back to actually one of the issues that he raised on the importance of smallholder farmers as one of the really vulnerable groups in society, and that's for our panel discussion. I also want to note that EFAD is one of the few institutions that I know of that holds itself accountable, not only for how much it spends, but on how much impact it is making on the beneficiaries. And I don't know of any other institution that actually does that. So clearly very important for us to partner with them in the future. With that, let me turn to our next presenter, who's Mark Rosegrant, who's Research Fellow Emeritus at IFPRI. Mark's done a fascinating study. When we just conducted an evaluation of ADB's Strategy 2030 at the midterm. And that's now available online for those of you who are interested. And one of the recommendations of that is to say that if you really are serious about strategy, you need to look at not only the 5 or 10-year horizon, but you need to look at the long game, a much longer horizon. And MDBs are not very good at doing scenario planning. And that's why I was so happy to see Mark was commissioned to do this. And so Mark's bio is available online, so let me not take up any more of your time, of his time in presenting by reading that out. It's a very distinguished researcher of long standing in the field. So please, let's welcome Mark Rosegrant to make his presentation of about 20 minutes. Right, Mark?
All right, well, thank you very much for that great introduction. And yeah, I do want to acknowledge the support from ADB for this work that we've done to try to look at key aspects. Let's see, is the thing working? Can you bring up my PowerPoint? Oh, there, okay. So we're trying to look at several aspects of long-term food security in Asia, and with support from ADB. And let me just start by talking about some of the goals of Asian agriculture policy, which we all know is ending hunger, achieving food and nutrition security, while at the same time promoting sustainable, resource-conserving agriculture. But achieving these goals, of course, requires meeting key food system challenges. And these include, as you can see here, the issue of climate change, which has already been raised several times here, which reduces productivity and well-being in agriculture. And of course, agriculture is also a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So for sustainable intensification, we do need to reduce agriculture's footprint. Water scarcity is increasing with growing demand from many sectors, and the rising cost of developing new water resources, which leads to constraints on supply. Agriculture productivity growth is slowing in many countries, while agriculture research and development expenditures are tending to decline in most of Asia. Agriculture input subsidies distort production decisions and crowd out productive investments in public goods. At the same time, as we've heard, value chains are often inefficient with high marketing margins and high volumes of food lost and waste. So in this presentation, we're going to discuss prospects for meeting these challenges under alternative investment scenarios for Asian agriculture. And we won't have time to really discuss in detail, but the framework we're using is the impact modeling system that IFPRI has, which is a set of linked climate, water, food, and economic models of the world agriculture economy, which generates estimates of production, consumption, food prices, and some environmental impacts for a quite detailed, highly disaggregated set of countries and regions, as you can see here, including 158 countries and 154 river basins. So we're taking a scenarios approach to this work, starting from a reference scenario, which takes the population and income trends from IPCC's SSP2, which is the middle of the road demographics and economic growth. And this is the most recent version that was just released about 3 months ago. We also include business as usual, projections of agricultural investment and productivity growth, and we're looking in this particular presentation using the climate scenario RCP 7.0, which is a moderate to somewhat severe pathway for climate change, and using the IPCSL climate model. We also have done sensitivity analysis across different models and RCPs. We're using a number of alternative investment scenarios, including investment in agriculture R&D, irrigation and water, rural infrastructure, and repurposing of subsidies. So just briefly, here's a summary of the investment scenarios. So you can see in investment in agriculture productivity growth, we have 3 levels of investment that you can read there yourselves. In irrigation and water use efficiency, we have one scenario that just expands irrigated area, and then another where, in addition to that expansion, we have increased investments in water use efficiency through modernization, rehabilitation, and upgrading of systems. Investment in rural infrastructure includes rural roads, rail, electrification, as well as markets and cell phones to improve marketing efficiency and reduce post-harvest losses. Then we do a more comprehensive investment, which combines the scenarios that you see there. Finally, we look at the issue of repurposing subsidies, which you've already heard about. And we designed this scenario as redirecting 30% of subsidy payments to producers to the investment categories described above for the 8 countries in which there was enough complete data. And you can see those here. So briefly, let's talk about the annual investment cost, 2020 to 2050, under different scenarios. You can see here business as usual on the left-hand side, or the reference scenario, and the investment scenarios increment on the right-hand graph. Let me apologize for the graphs are on different scales, so they're not directly comparable. But you can see here on the right-hand side, the increases are shown for the different categories, and also the percentage increases for each category relative to the reference scenario. The total investments are summarized below for the reference scenario and the comprehensive scenario. And you can see for Asian Pacific, for example, the annual investments in the reference scenario about $40 billion a year, and under the comprehensive investment, $68 billion a year, or a 69% increase. So let's start with some of the results that we derive from this. Starting here, is we can see that the increased investments boost food consumption relative to the reference scenario. And this shows changes in kilocalorie availability in 2050 compared to 2020 in the reference scenario and the comprehensive scenario. Let's look at Asia and the Pacific. So you do get, of course, improvements in the reference scenario across different food groups other than cereals, which actually has a negative increase. So you've seen already the possibilities of diversification. But then, of course, the comprehensive scenario boosts that consumption substantially, with the total increasing, as you can see, by about 30% compared to that reference scenario. And we do see diversification, as you can see here, looking at the different food groups, and cereals in particular, the share declines between 2020 and 2050, while fruits and vegetables, oils and sugars, and animal products increase somewhat. In a sense, this slide actually understates the amount of diversification. If you looked at the share and the increase between 2020 and 2050 rather than the endpoint, you'd see a greater change in the dietary patterns. The investments also, of course, increase projected crop yields, and you see here projected crop yields for the different regions, and for Asia and the Pacific, for the reference scenario, and the high R&D scenario, and the comprehensive scenario. So for example, for Asian Pacific in 2050, there's an increase from 8.5 tons per hectare to over 10 tons per hectare. And you see comparable increases in the different scenarios. So you do get substantial yield increases. And these, together with changing patterns in consumption, have a substantial influence on food prices as well. So again, we're looking at the alternative scenarios. You can see in the reference scenario, prices increase over time for all the commodities here. Some relatively slowly, like animal products, others quite high, cereals, fruits and vegetables, and roots and tubers. But in all cases, you get substantial reductions in prices over time due to the increased investments. These changes that I've just talked to you about have then very significant impacts on the risk of hunger in Asia. And here we start with, we're going to have 3 slides here. The first is Asian Pacific, the shares and population hungry in Asian Pacific. And here, for the region as a whole, you can see even under the reference scenario, you get very rapid improvements. And even by 2030, you're actually coming close to meeting the SDG 2 goal of under 5% hunger by 2030. But you also see that investments greatly accelerate the reductions and cut hunger substantially relative to the reference scenario. And the other point to make here is that, in a sense, these scenarios are too optimistic because a huge amount of this change is due to success in China and also to Southeast Asia, whereas other regions aren't necessarily faring as well. Here, for example, we see South Asia, which begins in 2020 with about 15% of hungry of the total population. And looking at the blue line, you see in 2030 it's still at 8% and reaches about 5% just after 2035, where you get much faster improvement and actually meet the SDG goals with the higher investment. But South Asia in general has quite a bit of success, in part due to the very rapid growth in income. Central and West Asia is another example, goes from about 14% and has a much slower trajectory of reducing hunger. It doesn't even reach the hunger target in 2050 under the reference scenario. Well, it does manage to meet it by about 2040, just past 2040 under the high investment scenario. We also look at projected nutrient availability for selected countries here. This one is for iron. We also look at zinc and vitamin A in the analysis. And you can see there that we get increased availability of these important nutrients under the reference, under the investment scenarios. But in fact, it's somewhat slow, to be honest. So a lot more has to be done here. India, you can see, improves relative to the reference scenario, but still under the recommended intakes for iron. Kazakhstan and the Philippines, as other examples, are above the recommended intakes and do improve. So we're getting some improvement in nutrient availability under these references also. But of course, as we've heard also, distributional concerns are of utmost importance, with many not being able to access even this level of nutrients. Projected water use here under different scenarios. Blue water is the water in surface reservoirs and aquifers delivered by irrigation. And we look at these, you can look across the various regions, and just to summarize briefly for Asia and Pacific, when you only invest in expanded irrigation, that year EXP scenario, by 2050 you actually increased water use by 2%, but when you have the same trajectory of investment in irrigation together with investment in water use efficiency, you can actually reduce water use by about 7.5% while maintaining the growth in irrigated areas. So again, these scenarios can be highly effective there. Next, we have investment in agricultural R&D, reducing agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. So here we have emissions in million tons of CO2 equivalent, again by region. And we see here for all regions, and then Asia and Pacific on the right-hand side, even in the reference scenario, there is some improvement over time in reducing greenhouse gas emissions due to a reduction over time of the emissions intensity of agriculture per dollar value in agriculture. But again, we see how these improvements can be accelerated under the higher investment analysis, shown this one for agriculture productivity growth, which shows by 2050 we have reduced the initial emissions in Asia and Pacific by a third here, and that's because of land-saving productivity growth, together with generation and adoption of technologies such as conservation tillage, precision agriculture, and improved management of rice and livestock, among others. The final scenario that to look at really quickly is just a quick summary of the investments in the rural infrastructure investments. Under this scenario, this one, together with the repurposing of subsidies, I think can be seen as possible best by investments from the analysis. As you can see, the broad-based rural infrastructure investment cuts post-harvest losses by about 50% in the region, while also reducing marketing margin, increasing production by 1 to 5%, but more importantly, lowering food prices and reducing hunger by 16 million people in 2035 compared to the reference scenario. The repurposing of agriculture sector government subsidies in just these 8 countries that we show is also very powerful. And remember, that's only 30% of the subsidies. So for these, this repurposing benefits not just those countries, but the entire ADB region, increasing ag output by 17% and reducing hunger by 51 million people, or 30% in 2035. So that's illustrated of the power of reallocating those subsidies into productive investments. Just a few conclusions then. As we saw here, increased investments in agricultural productivity, irrigation, and water use efficiency are highly effective, and there I list the ways there. But of course, what we saw is not good enough. So beyond these investments, you need investments in health, nutrition, clean water and sanitation, and education to further reduce hunger and child malnutrition and improve sustainability. In addition, there's always going to be some vulnerable people who aren't reached through these kinds of investments. So here you need income transfers and safety nets that can help them through short-term stresses or disasters and improve their nutrition and health over time. In addition, the impact of these investments would be further increased by improvements in the enabling environment for sustainable intensification, including extension innovation systems to enhance uptake of technology, gender-responsive policies and investments to increase women's access to land, finance, natural resources, and information, and design of greenhouse gas emissions reduction policies, including how to manage carbon payments in this system. Finally, is increasing access to farmer and sectoral finance to support private investment as well as public investment. But we can see here that a well-targeted portfolio of investments and policy reforms can meet the goals of Asian agriculture policy, even in the face of these significant food system challenges. Finally, I was asked to provide some key questions for discussion coming out of this work. One that we didn't address directly is that there are tendencies showing that rural-urban migration and as well as innovations in crop breeding systems, farming systems, and digital technologies are improving economies of scale in agriculture in Asia, which is leading to some pressure to consolidate land ownership or operational sizes of farms. So the question is, how can growth and the welfare of small farmers be balanced in such a transition? Next is, how can agriculture, health, and nutrition policies be integrated for maximum impact, getting out of the silos of these different policies? Another question then is, should investments be allocated specifically to different crops to further encourage diet diversification, moving investment, for example, from cereals to fruits and vegetables? And finally, how can policymakers address the big political economy challenge of repurposing agriculture subsidies? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'm sure you all have fascinating questions for Mark. But Mark, why don't we save those questions for the panel discussion itself?
Okay.
And if I could ask you just sit perhaps at the far end of the panel. And we will then invite questions and answers from you. So please keep your questions to Mark in your mind. Because then what we'll do is take up all the questions at the end. Because now we have a very distinguished panel to discuss not just the questions for discussion that Mark posed very cogently, but also any other issues that they may want to raise on this whole issue of the future of food and agriculture. And I must say, I come away a little bit more optimistic, Mark, after your presentation, that things are indeed possible. So we have our panel, which is going to take up these questions from their different perspectives. Let me just introduce them one by one and ask them to come up. And I won't read their bios because we won't have time for that, but they are available online. And I do assure you that this is a terrific panel. So first, we have Rehana Raza, Regional Director for Asian Pacific Division in IFAD. So welcome, Rehana. Then we have Dr. Kaudok Fat, the chair of the Erie Board of Trustees. You've already heard about Erie earlier, and also the former Minister of Agriculture in Vietnam. So Dr. Fat, please come on up. Then we have someone whom you already know from the earlier session this morning, Schengen Fan, who has been gracious enough to join this panel to give his very renowned thoughts, because he was, of course, former Director General of IFPRI as well as professor at China Agriculture University. So Schengen. And we have Tetsushi Sanobe. Tetsushi, as most of you know, is the Dean of the ADBI Institute, that is one of the leading think tanks in Asia and the Pacific. So welcome, Tetsushi. And finally, we have Ramesh Subramanian, Director General and Group Chief of the Sectors here in ADB. Ramesh oversees almost everything in the Asian Development Bank related to operations. So welcome, Ramesh. Can you hear me now? Welcome everyone. The way that we're going to work this panel is that I will not give the panel the luxury of free speech that Schengen gave of 5 minutes each, but instead we're going to actually turn to them to address specific questions, and I would ask them to limit their answers to about 2 or 3 minutes at a time, because I hope that we can have a more free-flowing conversational style on some of the very important issues that were raised. And I'd also invite them, feel free to also address any questions to your fellow panelists and Mark. And then we'll try to reserve at least 10 to 15 minutes at the very end for Q&A. So please keep your own questions in mind as we go along. Let me first start with you, Rehana. You heard your boss talk eloquently about the role of smallholder farmers and also how vulnerable they might be. But you also heard Mark talk about how the need to balance because small is not always beautiful or efficient. So can I ask you as IFAD's regional director for the region, how you could share your view on the long-term challenges for policies on smallholders and food?
Thanks, Mani. Thank you for this opportunity, and it's great to be on this panel. I'm actually not going to talk from my notes, I think, because I think some of the things that have come up have made me think a little bit more about what we're talking about. And I think from the position of long-term challenges, I think my boss very eloquently said what the challenges are for smallholder farmers, and particularly their centrality to thinking about food systems transformations and having a green and inclusive food system. So I think, you know, as the statistic, particularly for low and developing countries, 70% of the food produced by smallholder farmers is consumed in low and middle income countries. So they're very critical for the food system. But I think reflecting on some of what Mark said, and I think just a little bit about some of the earlier discussions, I think one of the things that really has struck me is about the opportunity of the changes that technologies may bring. So I think the challenge, or the first question that Mark raised about how different economic patterns and opportunities in technology may be changing the viability of smallholder farmers and their sustainability. So I think that's something that is something to think about deeply. I mean, at IFAD, we're committed to supporting and sustaining smallholder farmers, and we believe they're central to some of the challenges we're facing. But given these conflating factors, I think their viability in that context becomes very, very important. I mean, I think increasingly, given the variability of climate change, whether it's water stress or crop failures, or whether it's the other different challenges that lead to market failures in low productivity and all the other things that we are seeing because of climate change, particularly things like shifting patterns and harvesting seasons. All these factors are making things very, I think livelihoods of smallholder farmers have become incredibly vulnerable, and that seems to be the increasing challenge that we will see. And I think those are the challenges through talk about access of finance, knowledge, extension work, coordination failure, increasing fragmentation. Those are the challenges that we will have to address.
Thanks, Rahana. And we'll come back to this issue of the livelihoods. But I think the point that you raised about technology and its possibilities to address some of the issues that Mark raised are going to be key. I wanted to turn to Dr. Fat. You oversee ERI, and if there is one institution that we associate with how technology made an enormous difference to the world, it was, of course, the rice revolution, the green revolution. That a lot of it was sourced at ERI. We were also, of course, Minister of Agriculture in Vietnam, and our region has 9 of the 10 largest rice-consuming countries in the world. So can I ask you to reflect on how rice can, in fact, be a real factor in food security, especially in the use of technology going forward?
When ensuring food security for a nation is priority task for any government. In Asia and the Pacific, the rice is the core component of the food security. In Vietnam, when we say food, we first think of rice. President of Republic of Philippines said last year at Rice Congress, rice is life here. is true. Yeah. And we see that for last decades, rice production in the region has been growing relatively fast in many countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, and some other countries. But there are still countries not producing enough and trying very hard to do so. And recent turmoil in the rice market show that our achievement not sustainable yet. And more than that, we are facing new challenges. One is climate change. Another one is accelerated industrialization and urbanization. This process not only compete for land and resources, but also makes rice farming less attractive. And that's why we need to have new solution, but using the same word. From my experiences, I see three most important measures. We need to continue to develop new technology. Second, we need to deepen further, or we need to carry out further policy reform. And second, to invest more in irrigation and infrastructure. I would like to stress irrigation. For me, irrigation is the base for sustainable and high productive agriculture, especially for rice in climate change condition. And with regard of research, there are many challenges, but the biggest challenges we need to address. Some people, for some countries, still higher yielding varieties of rice needed. But for countries like Vietnam, we don't really need higher yielding. We need higher value rice, higher nutrition rice. And at the same time, we need to address challenges of climate change. That's why ERI recently focused on 4 flagship, that is 4 groups of issues. One is improvement of nutrition. Second is climate resilient rice farming. And third is direct seeded rice. And fourth is dissemination and education.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fat. And I think the issues that you raised, that it's not just technological research that's important, it's research on what works, and policies to do that are going to be key. So Schengen, let me turn to you. You were at IFPRI for a very long time, and you yourself a very renowned policy researcher in this area. What do you see as the priorities for policy reform, and what kind of research do we need to find out exactly what some of these impacts might be that are most effective?
Yeah, well, I think the Minister Fat can tell you a much better story about the impact of policy change, policy reform. I think China started in 1978, Vietnam started in 1985. India, I don't know, probably still under the consideration of many reforms. I think some of the priorities is actually very much related to some of the themes of this conference, that is repurposing some of the subsidies. One is, yes, we got to invest more in agriculture, in food, and in agricultural R&D. Now the question is, how can we allocate these very limited resources better? From subsidies, I think we heard from you that right now we are spending $850 billion in supporting agricultural production. These subsidies are not sustainable. that do not produce healthy, nutritious foods. And smallholders do not benefit them. How are we going to, we keep this money in our food and agriculture sector, but how can we really set new priorities to support agriculture R&D, support infrastructure, to support nutrition-driven practices of behavior change? Irrigation, yes, absolutely, but make sure that irrigation can also help to reduce the carbon emissions through alternating practices, direct seeding of perennial crops. So these are some of the new areas of policy. Obviously, the coordination, this is my probably second point, the coordination of policies across different ministries. Ministry of Health, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Agriculture. How can we reform the governance structure to make sure that the government has a coordination unit of mechanisms? Otherwise, some of the policies will cross purposes. Environment pushing very hard on protecting wild animals, agriculture pushing very hard on productivity, which are all great, but sometimes they do compete with each other. I'll stop here.
No, thanks a lot. Really important. And I want to get back actually to the point that you raised on the political economy of some of these policy reforms, especially on agricultural subsidies. And maybe Dr. Phat, later on, I'm going to ask you about that and what is, how to get around some of these questions. But before I do that, Tetsushi, in this panel already, but also in the earlier panel, there was a lot of talk about the need for international coordination because food imports and exports are really key to the whole system. And these transboundary issues are vexing for the world, especially now with climate change. You've been involved, aside from being Dean at ADBI, with not just the G7 and G20, but the T7 and T20, which for those who don't know is the think part of government policy. What do you see as the need might be in terms of the challenges for coordination for policies and how research can support that, given your experience?
Yeah, thank you, Manny. So the role of think tanks is to bridge research and policy. So it's a cliche, but it was so difficult. And then especially these days, as you just mentioned, those are policy issues, many important issues are very global problems. So thanks to the digital technology, so communication is now easier than before. So, for think tanks are usually much smaller than universities. So, biggest think tank would be smaller than the smallest university. So, it's really difficult for think tanks to do research. But the think tanks, can ask the researchers in the world. So, if we call for papers and those things, we can receive, very good responses these days. So previously, we could only ask the researchers in small list, but now we can, ask globally and then get good responses from the unknown person. But their, report or papers could be very, very nice. May not be very, high quality academic paper, journal paper, but policy studies, very informative. So, and then previously think tanks are only for the think tanks for their government within countries. So multilateral think tank like ADB Institute is very, very, minority. But now, through, for example, through Think 20 and the Think 7, which are the think tank engagement groups of G20 and G7 respectively. Think tank in the world are now, communicating more and more. And then especially when I was chair of T7 Japan last year, we worked very closely with T20 India. So I sit side by side my T20 India counterpart, 3 times in India and 1 in Tokyo one in New York City, one in Kigali, Rwanda. So very strong collaboration happened. And now my colleagues in the world try to create also another forums. So through that kind of communication, someone said in the previous session that the US White House persons emphasize the importance of communication and collaboration. Please use think tanks to start that kind of things.
No, thanks a lot, Tatsushi. And I guess that especially challenging perhaps in bringing in the researchers from developing member countries as well as the collaboration with them and the developed countries. Very quickly.
Yeah, those T7, T20 are not limited to G7, G20 member countries, but open and inclusive to all the think tanks in the world.
Thank you. Ramesh, your ears must have been burning all morning because when it comes to food security, people have been talking, and you've heard your fellow panelists talk about the need to work across sectors, that it's not just agriculture. In order to combat hunger, you need to have infrastructure, health and nutrition. And you're now overseeing the sectors group in the ADB for the first time, in which there's I'm sure you're dealing with the challenges of how to stimulate our work across silos. Do you have any thoughts on lessons for our member countries on really trying to cut across what seems to be human nature is to work in silos?
Thanks so much, Manny. Thanks for moderating this. Fantastic overview by Mark, where he touched on the intersectoral issues as well. For ADB, maybe a very quick capsule overview. What Manny mentioned, we call it the new operating model, where for the first time ever, we brought the 7 major sector groupings together. This does not mean the sectors were not collaborating earlier. They were, but we recognized the need for certainly bringing the expertise together in each sector across the bank as well as across the sectors together in one group. Now, there are plenty of opportunities if you look at what we had done over the last 3 years, taking the pandemic years out, 2020, 2021 out, but going back to, say, 2015 to 2019, and then looking at last year particularly, there are, I would call it, twin aspects. One is from a technical point of view, what are the pathways? Say, for example, picking up on the human capital dimensions of what Mark mentioned. Clearly, when we are looking at boosting food system transformation, food system resilience, we need to look at human capital, what is happening within countries. So this is something we've been focusing particularly in coming up with and helping countries, India, for instance, as well as Bangladesh, Indonesia, 3 countries that come to mind, Philippines as well, more from a technical vocational education point of view, but the 3 countries that I mentioned from a higher education point of view. Infrastructure, if you look at transport infrastructure, clearly food logistics play a very important role in terms of last mile type of issues that Joe talked about in the morning, but even more basic things in terms of moving food from rural to markets. Clearly, that is something we need to look at, and within that, if you look at the climate interface from agriculture, its impact of climate on agriculture, as well as agriculture on climate. So here, multiple or many sectoral dimensions come into play. Energy, food, water nexus, comes into mind immediately. So you have the challenge of either too much water or too little water. How do we make sure that we address these issues? So water resources and agriculture, but also ensuring in a balanced manner adequate water supply systems are in place. So the challenges between rural and urban distribution of resources also comes into play. So that's kind of one facet if you look at from a technical point of view, the different sectors that we operate in. But another very important thing which many of you may know, ADB has a unique business model. We've got a single balance sheet that brings together sovereign as well as non-sovereign operations. And here, private sector has a huge role to play in all areas of economies, particularly in the agri-business sector. Our private sector operations have been playing a major role. If you look at last year, for instance, they did close to about $900 million if you're looking at volume. But the impact that it has created, particularly in terms of promoting small farmers' livelihoods, by providing those critical linkages to markets, that's been phenomenal. Now, moving ahead, in the context of the G20 leaders' call on the to create more headroom through our reinterpreting our capital, we are looking at particularly how we can bring the public and private sector dimensions together. I can respond to other points later.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Ramesh. Really important lessons. And I was wondering whether or not there were examples in developing member countries themselves where countries have succeeded in cutting across sectoral boundaries across ministries. And I was wondering if I could ask Schengen and maybe Rehana, whether you know of any examples where there have been really effective ways for this cross-sectoral work.
I can start. There are a couple of good examples. The one is in Rwanda. In the president's office, they have set up a so-called nutrition coordinator. That helps to coordinate the work from Ministry of Agriculture, Health, and so on. So the president of Rwanda, Kagame, is very passionate about it. So that's a very good lesson to them. For China, I don't know whether it's a lesson or whether it's a good case. There used to be a so-called central committee to coordinate all the agriculture food together. Then it was downgraded to the ministry level, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. But recently, they learned a lesson. They thought all this food, nutrition, security, climate change has to be coordinated by a higher level. So now that coordination committee has moved back to the central committee to coordinate health, nutrition, agriculture, environment, just in one body. So they have annual sort of regular meetings by bringing ministers together. And very importantly, one of the sort of vice premier who is in charge of health and agriculture. And his first question is, can we use healthy diets to derive agriculture production and supply? So, but I must say, more have to be done. And I think the ADB could help the countries set up sort of coordination mechanisms at a country level.
No, thanks. Rehana, any views? And sorry, if you have.
I mean, I'm not going to speak from my own experience particularly, but what comes to mind is the BRAC model of poverty graduation, and particularly given the target group that IFAD works with, which is the last mile. So the way of programming where you're looking at multifacets, so you're looking at nutrition, looking at health, you're looking at agricultural production, you're looking at a whole set of services that are targeting the rural community in order to transition them out. This is not coordination at the ministerial level, but definitely coordination at the programming level for a particular target group, which I think is very important. Thank you.
Thanks. Ramesh, any examples come to mind from your experience in working with our developing member countries?
This has been evolving for the positive, for the better. So 3 examples that come to mind quickly. The first is the climate and health initiative that we helped the India G20 presidency launch last year. So clearly, when we are looking at health, you need to look at it in the One Health construct. You bring in human, animal, and planetary health together. Multiple sectors immediately come into play. So India actually has set up a very comprehensive system of bringing multiple agencies and ministries together under the Prime Minister's office. So the CHI, the Climate and Health Initiative, works with them. So part of that, looking at the entire agriculture ecosystem, particularly the animal husbandry sector, becomes quite critical for smallholder farmers. Is very critical. Second is our home base here in the Philippines. 2 years ago, we did the first ever climate change policy-based loan, first comprehensive dedicated focus on climate change. And that brought agriculture, energy, finance, and to some extent transport dimensions together. So this was facilitated by the Department of Finance playing a lead role, bringing all these players with a common overarching policy framework and then working with the different partners. And the third is in Uzbekistan. I don't know if any Uzbek delegates are here. We'd worked on, what would, if you look at the project design, it'll appear as a pure plain vanilla roads project, but it's actually got a lot of agriculture behind in terms of boosting food security. So there are these examples emerging, and we could do more.
Oh, great. Thanks. I want to now turn to another policy issue. And Mark, you called it repurposing subsidies. And I know that if there's one emotional issue policy-wise, it's agricultural subsidies that cuts across both developed and developing countries. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to ask Dr. Fat and then Tetsushi, perhaps more from your Japanese side, to talk about agricultural subsidies and what are ways to really repurpose them. So Mark, if you could just talk a little bit of what do you mean by repurposing?
Yeah, so that's a movie, as Yo and others have said, there's very large amounts of money that are going into subsidies on things like for fertilizer, also for electricity to drive water use, and energy subsidies as well. And what they tend to do is induce overuse of those inputs beyond any kind of economically sensible numbers. So you're not only sort of wasting the money that's going into it, you're wasting inputs. In many cases, that's also then driving environmental degradation from runoff of fertilizer with higher levels of greenhouse gas emissions through the nitrogen loss. It's been a contributing factor to the overdrafting of groundwater in South Asia and parts of the rest of Asia. So it's wasteful both financially and economically and resource-wise. Then the big question comes, though, is how do you start moving away from that? I mean, a couple of things is, obviously, you can't take away that entire amount immediately. We were looking notionally at a 30% drop, and you could see even at just 30%, putting 30% of those subsidies into more productive investment has a huge impact. I think one way to sort of reduce the pain of it is to also put some of that money into direct income transfers to the farmers who are essentially giving up the subsidies. So in that way, at least you're not driving bad input decisions. And I think that's increasingly potentially possible to do because the rise of internet banking and farmers having smart cards and so forth. So I think, 10 years ago you might not have been able to do it, but I think there are systems in place now where you could do those kinds of income transfers efficiently as well. So that, I think, would at least take some of the hit off of the farmers who would lose essentially a source of income.
Thanks. Dr. Fat, when you were minister, and I'm sure you had to contend with this issue, any policy reform, there are winners and losers. And how do you make sure that you can actually do these reforms that seem to make sense on balance? And especially when it comes to taking away subsidies, because as you know, once you give something away, it's very hard to take it back.
When in my whole career, I has been fighting to eliminate subsidies. So I never propose subsidies. And I always try to convince the government to give that money to invest in irrigation, in research, and education. But of course, sometimes we need some short-term, small-scale subsidy to encourage farmers' participation, or this to have the poorest people, it may be, but should be minimum short-term. And most money should be invested in something longer term, research, extension, irrigation, infrastructure, education. Thank you.
Thank you. Tetsushi, I hope I haven't put you on the spot, because I know that especially rice subsidies are particularly important in your country.
Oh, yes. But you have the wrong person, because I'm not expert. I know very little, because I'm not a Japan think tank, but Asia and Pacific think tank. But as I lived in Japan for so many years, like this, so I know something. And then, so my understanding, the subsidies in Japan made the Japanese agriculture very weak, because the government purpose was not to increase production, but do not make farmers unhappy. So that for political reason, right? So it lasted so many years, so many decades. So that made Japanese agriculture so weak. But recently, some changes in the better direction seems to be happening. But maybe in the Q&A session, maybe someone like Shingo Kimura, who put this forum together under the guidance of Ramesh, and also the great expert like Kei Otsuka here. So please let them
Okay, so please keep your powder dry for the Q&A, which will be in a few minutes. But Shungan, you must have been dealing with some of these issues, tricky political economy issues from IFPRI, and any reflections on your mind on how to get around them?
Yeah, I think Yori is expert on political economy issues. I learned quite a bit for the last several years, because we have a coalition that published a paper called Economics of Food System Transformation. I think political economy is a big part. I think the one is, how can we really use winners' revenue or benefit to support, I don't say subsidies. Subsidy is a bad word, or maybe support losers. So the losers will not complain. So how can we really make sure that we have a mechanism to do that? I mean, that's a key lesson I learned from political economy. Now, obviously, building coalition to push something positive will be so critical. So for example, farmers' organization, the private sector, maybe even government, to have dialogue, to show their positions. What can they compromise? By compromising, they can gain from something else. So this is something, at least I learned for the last probably several years.
Thank you. Ramesh?
Just a couple of quick points, Manny. ADB does about 20% of our annual commitments go for policy reforms. So that's about like $4 to $5 billion or so. So from a broader fiscal and macroeconomic point of view, the whole issue of public sector resource management, and particularly the question of subsidies, is very, very critical. We do engage in a lot of diagnostics work and policy dialogue. The best performing subsidy systems, if I can call it, are those that have very clear performance targets, including best targeting, as well as sunset clauses, because you cannot have these subsidies forever. Now, this is the best ideal definition of how subsidies should function. Obviously, there are gradations, or you see a spectrum in most countries. Now, if you look at concrete examples of where we have been quite, I would say, relatively pleased with progress on broader subsidies, Indonesia is one country that comes to mind. Still, significant challenges are there, but I think periodically they've been addressing the whole issue of subsidies for various industries, including you've got petroleum subsidies, but then coming into agriculture sector, regional subsidies, and so on. Still a lot of work, but I think they've made good progress. Pakistan is one country where we had done extensive work, not recently, in the around 2009, at the height of the earlier global food crisis. there was a significant upswing in terms of looking at this issue more closely. This is something we do need to get back in that country and to boost agriculture competitiveness. Thank you.
No, that's right. And I'm reminded actually of how important it is to, if you have inefficient subsidies, you can replace them with less inefficient ones. And of course, Mexico is a prime example of that, in which the tortilla subsidy was replaced by the conditional cash transfer program, which has now been scaled up all around the world. So I think that's an interesting point. I'm now going to look to see whether there are any questions, both online. I have an iPad here, which I'm not sure I know how it works, but no one has asked any questions yet. So I'm inviting people from the audience to please, there are microphones over there. If you have a question or a very short answer to a question that you didn't think the panel addressed sufficiently, please start lining up there at these microphones and identify yourself. And please make your intervention as efficient as possible, crisp and clear. Please.
Thank you. This for Mark Rosgan. Mark, you commented on the role of...
Can you identify yourself, please?
roles going forward, and how would you allocate the resources for international research versus national research?
Okay, Mark, can I just ask you to hold on this, and then we're going to take a couple of rounds to make sure that we give as much time to everyone. So please, if you have a pen, you might want to keep this in mind. So over to you. Next. Please identify yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Engineer Rolly De Sibilia of RDS Technology and Development Corporation. This is a question for the panel. What are the strategies for mitigating the carbon footprint of the agriculture sector?
Okay, thank you. Okay, and next, please.
Hello, my name is Redden, and I work for Football Manila. I'm 19 years old, so this is just a thought. I'm just curious because I browsed ADB and I saw the 54th annual meeting of the Board of Governors. So what caught my attention is the Asia Pacific Tax Hub, and I just want to elaborate. I just want elaborate explanation about it. I'm curious to know more about it, and how is it related to SDG? Or more like, I want to know how is it processed, or maybe if they're related or not. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the question.
Thank you. I'll take one more, and then we'll turn it over to the panel, and we'll do one more round, if we can. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Pankaj Tyagi from Central Water Commission.
I think, is the microphone on?
Yeah, it's working. Okay. Yeah, I'm Pankaj Tyagi, working in Central Water Commission, Government of India. My question is with Rehana ma'am regarding the technology adaptations. See, ultimately the technology has to be adapted by the farmers, whatever the cheaper or whatever the extension activities for the adaptation of technologies proposed by the government, like in micro-irrigation technology. But adaptation rate is very, very low. And like in micro-irrigation, even farmers are seeing their neighbor is benefiting from the technology, and technology is very cheap also. So I think the questions arise for the right social reform. Something has to be done, or the what is the real policy change in the social sector is required, or some economical sector, or that is the questions arise. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more round, but from now, I'm afraid my panel may forget some of the questions. So, Mark, let's turn to you first.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bruce. Yeah, so, I mean, one thing to point out is that in Asia, the CGIAR is quite a small actor now. I mean, obviously Erie has important roles, EME on water and ICRISAT, but the expenditures on R&D in NARS are, something like 10 to 15 times higher on an annual basis than the CG, because the CG transfer a huge amount of their resources to African issues. I think given that the CG should focus on sort of high-level research, genomics, gene editing, to the extent that's politically acceptable, high-throughput gene sequencing, to generate a set of cultivars of varieties that then could be developed for specific agroclimatic zones by the NARS. And I'm pretty sure there's some of that going on already. So I think Erie is perhaps right, doesn't release their own varieties so much anymore. And I think that's the way to go for ICRISAT as well. Just recognize that the resources are fairly small, but there's very high capabilities in the system. And of course, China and to some extent India have tremendous capabilities in research too. I guess that's the way I would see them going forward.
Okay. Please.
I was Minister of Agriculture of Vietnam for 12 years. So I tried very hard to strengthen research system of the country. But I found, and now I really deeply convinced, that we need to have both international, one strong, to be a leader, to do high-level research. And we have strong national system as well, because agricultural science need to attach to local condition. But developing countries like Vietnam, we would never be able to have such high-level, highly qualified research institution like international one. It's not because I am the chair of board trustees of Erie, but I strongly believe that. At Erie, for example, we have a gene bank of 130,000 samples, and we are using IE to characterize rice varieties. No developing countries can do that. And at Erie, I see really, really good scientists that the best is to have such combination of two. And I really allow me to use this forum to ask the donor to assist both CGIAR international research system to be strengthened, to be leader and strengthen also national system. I am grateful to ADB for previous assistance to Vietnam and to Erie.
No, thanks for that, because I think the MDB evolution towards addressing global public goods has to address knowledge, which is another public good that sometimes doesn't get enough attention. Does anyone want to address this issue of the carbon footprint, the question on strategies for addressing the carbon footprint? Anyone wanted to address that? Rahana? And then also you have a specific question that you...
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about a little bit about what IFAD is doing with smallholder farmers. We are working with smallholder farmers to, in our projects, to adopt agroforestry, agroecology practices as much as possible. A lot of our new projects are very much focused on that and encouraging that adaptation and linking them up, not just in terms of food systems, but also linking it up to, let's say, niche export markets and agricultural products. So really sort of doing that whole value chain addition of branding and processing as well to market those goods internationally. So those are the kinds of soil conservation and water harvesting and things like that. At the small scale, that is what we're doing for the carbon footprint.
Mark?
Shall I answer the other question first?
Yeah.
I think the other question was about why technology is not being adopted. And I think that's, I think there's a whole bunch of things that are at play there. Clearly, there's the level of risk averseness of small farmers. There is the lack of institutions. And I think there is just, the political economy of that context. And I think in many of those areas, we have to look at how do we mitigate risk to some degree, what kind of institutions we create in order to help small farmers adapt some of this new technology that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thanks. Mark, and then I'll turn to Ramesh on the tax hub question.
Yeah, just briefly on the carbon issue. These kinds of programs that were described here are excellent, but it's worth pointing out just how immensely difficult it is to get it right. In the United States now, they're trying to put together systems to pay farmers to reduce emissions. And even there, to get agreement on what technology reduces carbon emissions by how much and over what amount of time and how do you verify it, has just led to huge delays in the whole process. So, and it's even more difficult when you're dealing with many small farmers. I mean, you have huge farmers in the U.S. and still you can't get the systems in place. So it's really going to take a lot of work on designing the systems, measurement techniques involved.
Thanks. Ramesh?
Thanks, Manny. I'll also pick up on the carbon footprint. This is a hugely important issue. Super quick answer, but we'll be happy to chat with the person who raised the question. This is in terms of country sector assessments, we are going deeper. We've always been doing it, but particularly for the past about 4 or 5 years or so. Any agriculture sector project that you take will certainly have a climate element in it. We have to come up as a requirement. We have to identify what are the mitigation and adaptation financing that we provide. So this has become quite an integral part. Countries where we've done extensive work in terms of enabling policy, legal, regulatory environment, in terms of assessing the climate impact, both in terms of impact of ag on climate as well as climate on ag, and looking at carbon footprint, identifying and taking measures. Philippines, Bangladesh, Mongolia are the 3 countries where we have done in a comprehensive manner, but investment projects are in a number of countries. Natural capital, looking at the entire ecosystem and biodiversity systems, very, very important in terms of the damage that we are causing. Do we have good accounting systems in place? This is a huge area. We've set up a natural capital lab. My colleague Narayan Iyer, who is here, you could reach out to him. You can give him more information. On the tax hub, I'm so happy. I think you mentioned your age. I greatly appreciate the interest that you're showing. We'll be happy to talk to you afterwards. The hub was created about 4 years ago, just before the pandemic. President Massa, who spoke in the morning, he's been a big champion of this because countries need to shore up their own sources of revenue. Of course, financing, external financing, capital market financing, critical, but countries also need to have their own sources of revenue. So the hub has been operational. We provide significant technical assistance as well as enabling environment policy reform type of work and investments. Connecting to the nutrition issues that we've been talking about, major role that tax systems can play by looking at consumption behavior. Philippines, again, is a very good example where they've looked at come up with the so-called sin taxes, looking at sugary beverages, fatty food, and so on, with the resources coming in to support health system financing. So there are multiple dimensions here when we talk about taxes and domestic revenues. But we'll be happy to chat more with you later.
Great, thanks. So we'll take one more last round of questions. So over to in the middle first, and then, okay.
Hello.
Please.
Hi, my name is Ashok Gulati from India. And my question is to Dr. Fett. In our earlier incarnation at IFPRI, we did a lot of research with Shangan that $1 invested in investment, say in irrigation or in agri R&D, gives 5 to 10 times more returns than giving the same dollar to fertilizer subsidy or power subsidy. But when you look at what is the experience across countries, the subsidies are rising at double, triple the rate, particularly in countries that are democratically very vibrant. And the reason that political economy part is that the policymaker has a horizon of 4 years, 5 years, whereas investments will bring returns after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So this short term versus medium to long term, how do we resolve that issue? One half a minute on this repurposing subsidy, because we are talking only of the subsidies part. Shangan said, let's call it the support. It is the producer support estimates that OECD has been working on, and it takes both the things into account. Input subsidies, but there are many countries that suppress their output prices to take care of the consumer interest. And on the net, they may be taxing agriculture. And actually India, from where I come, is one of them. It is taxing its agriculture through hidden policies of trade restrictions, stocking limits on traders, and so on and so forth. So when you talk only input subsidies and forget about the other side of the story, I think the reform has to be on both ends of the spectrum, input side as well as output.
Very well put, Dr. Garati. Thank you. Yes, quickly, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Kei Otsuka from Kobe, famous for Kobe beef, but I will not talk about the beef today. Regarding the environmental issues, the most important, the available technology for rice farming is alternate wetting and drying system. That reduces emission well more than 50% and reduces water use by more than 50%. I'm very pleased to know that the ADB is working on that. My colleague Takashi Yamano is particularly active in this respect. And then I mention a little bit about the impacts of subsidy. In my understanding, there are 3 impacts of subsidy. One is already pointed out by Mark, overuse of inputs. Another thing is subsidy preserves inefficient farms. Even farms are inefficient because of the subsidy, they can survive. And subsidy tends to lead to overproduction. Supply exceeds demand. So government tries to reduce production, total production, not only total production, also production of the efficient farms. So even if farmers are efficient, they cannot expand the size of the operation. So there are a lot of negative impacts of subsidy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, over here, please.
Hi, Gisela Chongson from Jollibee Group Foundation. I appreciate the discussion of the panel, especially looking ahead and what can be done to address the intersectionality of the different issues. But looking at the horizontal, I have not heard any comment, and I'd like to hear the panel's thought on this, that in the end, the vertical alignment, especially down at the local government level, which is really the one providing the extension service, the one providing all the support to the smallholder farmers, how come that is not being expressed? Thank you.
Thank you. And one last one. You'll have to be the last one, please.
Thank you. My name is Manoj. I work for Nutrition International as Asia Regional Director. My question is to the panel. In your view, what are the biggest challenges at this point of time national government are facing in terms of integrating nutrition and food security? We have so much of a discussion about having a blended approach of food security and nutrition security, but we have seen a big gap between intention of national governments and real actions. Why? Thanks.
Thanks. Now, turn to the panel and to answer questions that have been raised, and also any last words you might have, because we have to wind up. So hopefully you can do that in about 30 seconds or so. So who'd like to start? Maybe Mark, we'll start with you, and any last thoughts, as well as address any of the questions that have come up. And you will have time to talk to the panel outside of this session.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of great points were made by the panel. I don't have, especially Ashok and Kay, to expand upon some of the things we've been discussing. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is going to be trying to overcome the political economy structures that are in place. Who knows, it may be impossible, but I think it's something we have to work about. Those of us working in Asia or something have been talking about getting rid of the self-sufficiency approach for, 50 years now? And it's still there in many countries. I think we can't give up on that. But we have to, at the same time, recognize that there are winners and losers, and the losers should somehow be compensated, but hopefully in ways that are more efficient than what is being done now.
Thank you. Rana?
Is this just last comments?
Yeah. If you don't want to answer the questions, just your last comments.
Okay, I also I kind of wanted to order our vertical comment that the lady made. I mean, I think increasingly, I know for ag, I mean, we are working increasingly with decentralized governments, and I think the challenge of looking at governance structures and actually delivery is very, very important. And I think in many of our projects, we don't look at that sufficiently. And I think it's a constant challenge.
With regard of subsidy, I think the most important is to have right and strong commitment from politicians, not to be lured by short-term interests of political party or particular person. Always look at long-term and overrun benefit of a nation rather than only small group. And secondly, with regard of footprint, agriculture can and must contribute in reduction of emission. We've been working mostly on technical side, but actually, yes, we need that. We need even more than that, but we need also good policy to encourage 100 million small farmers and businesses to involve. Otherwise, nothing will happen. And we need infrastructure, as Dr. Schengen Fan said. So ADB, please, research, policy reform, and infrastructure for Asia and Pacific. Thanks.
Here, here. Schengen.
Yeah, I think we needed more politicians like Dr. Fat. But I think, as he said, he needs support, he needs evidence. So then he can go to the Congress or Parliament and say, hey, look, this is what the IPRI study tells us. The benefits. And I remember when the economy began to rise up in Vietnam, when Vietnam began to export more rice, then the price will go down, smallholders increase of the scale of the production. So who benefits, who loses? And Dr. Fett has all this information there. How can we make sure that losers will also not be compromised? But to address Ashok's question, Ashok Gulati's question, I think you said politicians, right? Well, they only have short-term sort of goals. But how can we make sure that the citizens who will vote for politicians understand all these different elements, who benefits, who knows? I mean, our experience in India, including IPRI's work, Regina Birner, analyzed political economy of subsidies. Smallholders actually don't know. They actually don't benefit from certain subsidies. But politicians for them said, oh, I'm going to give you free fertilizer, free water, free electricity. But it's a waste. So that's a communication to general citizens, not just to politicians, will be so critical to influence the whole political process.
Thank you. Tetsushi.
Yeah,
last point.
I agree completely with these speakers that socio-economic and political barriers to the progress of agriculture, sustainable agriculture, will be a very, very important research area. And also, from the international perspective, the kind of institutional framework, like sg-afnr and those, institutional things should be more and more discussed in international forum.
Thank you. Ramesh, last words.
Thanks, Manny. That point on horizontal and vertical, very, very critical. Not that those are not important, we just didn't go into the details. All the action takes place at the local government level. In the Philippines, for example, implications of Mandana's ruling and so on, we do need to look at, so totally agree. ADB's focus, mantra is food systems transformation through climate-smart infrastructure to achieve access, equity, and security. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have now actually impinged on your food security because it is lunchtime. But I think we've had a terrific conversation, and I hope the extra 7 minutes you'll forgive us. But please join me in giving this panel a healthy round of applause.